Well, it's been about 6 months since I last sat down and answered some of your burning, smoking hot, fiery questions. So today, as you can see, we're doing just that. And even though these sort of off the cuff, sort of unscripted videos are a bit outside of my norm and my comfort zone, I do feel somewhat prepared since I've already had at least one coffee and I've come armed with my, I guess it would be third favorite caffeinated beverage, which is needed because I was up late playing horror games on my second channel, so shameless plug. If you haven't checked out Spur After Dark and you like gaming, definitely jump over there, watch, subscribe, comment, hang out. I could use the help in getting that channel off the ground. But anyway, as always, I put out the call on Instagram for folks to send me questions, collected them for about 24 hours, and then compiled them into the ones I found the most broadly interesting for me to answer and entertaining for you to watch and hear the answers to, like someone who's asking for advice between buying a Breville or a Slayer, and also someone who's asking what advice a gray bearded or a gray-ish bearded Spro would give to a less gray bearded Spro. So without any further fanfare, let's dive into the first question, shall we? All right, so first up, and this is a nice one to sort of ease into the Q&A vibe, and this comes from Daniel RBF1, and they ask, if you had to restart your coffee setup for $3,000, what would you get? Now, I think that's a good question, and knowing what I know now about just how important a grinder is to the whole operation, honestly, more important than your espresso machine and most of the other factors involved, I would say I would spend probably 2/3 of that on the grinder. Because in my mind, after you hit about $2,000 for a grinder, you kind of bump up against that point of diminishing returns where I haven't really seen a grinder that's over $2,000 where you're really getting more other than little bells and whistles or a little bit bigger burrs, which we've talked about before. And I don't know, $2,000 just seems like a good limit, like a nice hard limit. And there's a lot of great options out there. I've got the P64, which I think I paid $1,800 for at the time. And there's also things like the Zerno, which I haven't tried personally yet. That is also a good option, even though I've had some shots from it and stuff at trade shows and whatnot. So that's the grinder I would start with. So let's just say that's $2,000 out of the way. And then from there, I would say a pretty inexpensive machine. The two that I would generally recommend, I don't know, an E61 of like any type for the most part, because they tend to be very easy to repair, maintain, modify, or a Gaggia Classic, which again, with a 6-bar spring, was pulling shots that were on par with my Mini at the time. So, and also that has a ton of options depending on how handy you are, how much you want to dig into it. So that leaves you at about $2,500, which gives you about $500 left over to buy accessories and maybe invest in something that's super important to your coffee, and that's water, which brings me to today's sponsor, Third Wave Water. Because when it comes to brewing the best possible coffee, water makes up to 98% of what's in your cup, and it's absolutely vital to the long-term reliability and performance of your equipment. So after months of testing and trials, I've landed on Third Wave Water formulas for all of my coffee preparation. Not only is it formulated to not produce scale or cause corrosion, but there's an option for every palate. Third Wave Water offers a wide variety of mineral blends specifically designed to get the most out of your favorite roast level or brew type. So take control of one of the most important variables for brewing quality coffee today and head over to thirdwavewater.com/Sprometheus or use code Sprometheus at checkout to snag 10% off your first purchase. Thanks to Third Wave Water for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back into it. And the next question is a good one, and it's from Mr. Zanej. And they ask, what is some coffee advice you would recommend to yourself when you first started? I already talked about the importance of a grinder, and I think in my mind and a lot of folks' minds, when they start in this process, particularly with espresso, the focus is on the wrong things or on something that's a little less consequential than the grinder, and that's espresso machines. Also, I would say worry less about what other people tell you is right. I think there's just a lot of folks out there, a lot of noise out there telling you what you should be doing and how you should be doing it and how something should taste and why it should taste that way. Lots of focus on flavor notes and all those things. It can be just a bit much. So I would say just follow your own path, blaze your own trail. Like what you like, don't be apologetic about it. I think that's fair. This question caught my eye, and I'm not sure if they're memeing, but I'm going to approach it as if they're serious because maybe they are. I have no idea. But Coco Nibs Coffee asks, "What's better, Breville or Slayer? I don't know which one to buy. For all intents and purposes, they do the same thing." Now that may be a controversial opinion, but as Matt Perger said in that video I did a little while back talking about, espresso machines and the future of La Marzocco, an espresso machine is kind of a glorified hot water kettle with a pump on it. A lot of times what you're paying for is brand recognition, build materials, the artistic design of it. Honestly, I would say Slayers are probably one of the most beautiful espresso machines out there, in my personal opinion, especially the single groups. I love the single groups. But when we're talking about up against a Breville, we're also talking about a price range difference of $9,500. You can get a Breville for like what, $500 at the lower end, $1,000, $1,200 at the higher end, and a single group Slayer is like $9,000 to $12,000, somewhere in that range. I'm not 100% sure, because even that's too rich for my blood. I think that if you're just starting out in espresso, I would go with the Breville. I think that spending $10,000 on an espresso machine out of the gate, if you haven't really dug into espresso or the process, or really kind of familiarize yourself with the whole experience of espresso, which is a finicky and really truly can be a massive pain in the ass, I think cutting your teeth on a Breville for, until it's out of warranty and breaks, and then getting yourself a Slayer if that's what you really want to do. But as I said 2 other times, at least previously in this video, I would say focus on the grinder, focus on the grinder, focus on the grinder. I don't know. It just seems like the best value for money. So worry less about the espresso machine. That's what I'm saying. But yeah, start with the Breville, move to the Slayer if you're just getting into espresso. If you're already well-versed in espresso, you have the budget, get a Slayer. They're beautiful. What can I say? Baristas Brew asks, creative ruts are tough to work through. How do you do it? Now, I got to be honest with you. I don't. I just nose to the grindstone, power through. At least that's what I've done for years. I think there have been, I don't know, probably more than I can count on 2 hands occasions where I just felt like I don't want to do this anymore, and I'm tired of it, and I'm frustrated, and I just want to be a normal person again, and tired of just the whole process, and I'm filming a video and just like hate every frame of it. It's just, it happens a lot. And I don't know if I am the best person to ask. I would say get a therapist. But I do think now that I've pulled back a little bit, and I'm still adjusting to the new schedule of posting twice a month, but I think, if you can afford it, if you can give yourself that grace to just kind of pull back a little bit and reduce the amount of creative stuff you're doing to try and, give your brain a break. Over these past couple of months when I've cut down to 2 videos a month, I've been working in the yard a lot. Like I got a serious tan on. I've been remodeling my yard. I've learned how to put down pavers, which, I'm pretty proud of. And so I think that just find other outlets, find other things that you can do, take a step back, and hope that when you come back to it, you feel less, burnt, which isn't always a guarantee. I wish I had just a straight up answer for you on that, but unfortunately, that's about as good as I can do. All right, so next up is a question that I had never really considered or thought much about, and it's from Valley or Vali. I don't know, from one weird name person to another. I apologize if I'm butchering your name, but they ask, why do most commercial baristas prefer filter over espresso? And I don't know if I have like a real answer for that. I don't know if it's like, is it true? Is that a common thing? I mean, I think filter is just easier to drink generally. You can savor it. You can spend more time with it. I think You do get a lot more of an experience as it cools. Like espresso is sort of similar in that way, but the volume is so small that you don't really get that full breadth, maybe. Um, but I think that's a really interesting question. And I would love to hear your answers on that as well, folks. So, yeah, I don't have a really clear answer for that. Um, I honestly don't even know if that's a true statement or just something was, gleaned over some years. But personally, I prefer espresso, but I understand people prefer filter. Um, it's an easier drink, but I could also just say, it could be a skill issue. All right, next question. Okay, this one's coming from Eiley Clickow. Again, apologies if I've butchered that, but they're asking, I'm driven only by exploring, not flavor itself, and I've had all the coffees. Burnt out, help. I've kind of gone full circle in my coffee tasting career. Like there was a time early on when it came to brewing coffees where I really searched out those really crazy, unique, nuts coffees. And I've kind of made my way back around to really appreciating the simplest coffees and really putting my more experienced palate back into tasting coffees that maybe I wouldn't have bought or wouldn't have been interested or excited in earlier on, right? And doing it in different brew methods. Different for me, espresso obviously is my thing. And so spending more time trying different shot styles, different preparations, all that stuff. So I think that's the only advice I can give you is that like, if you feel like you've tried all the coffees, go back to coffee one and see how all that experience has changed your palate and your experience with coffees that at the time you maybe deem by now you maybe deem less exciting to you or your palate or your exploration of coffee. All right. So next question is from Tevs, and they ask, and of course I'm an espresso boy already, and I've already mentioned that, but they ask, would you consider the ultimate dripper collection to cover the most ground? And honestly, as someone who is an espresso aficionado, I just love espresso, and that's what I make almost 100% of the time. I do have an opinion on this, and I would be curious also to hear y'all's opinion. But for me, I would say the two drippers that I would recommend someone have to cover the most possible ground is a Hario switch, which gives you V60 abilities, which for me is a really great, bright, clean, when done well, when done right, you get just a beautiful cup of coffee from a V60. And their filters are just so easy to find. They're ubiquitous, basically. But also with the switch, you can essentially turn it into a clever dripper. You can do immersion brews. You can do all sorts of playing around with them. I have a switch recipe that's kind of brewing in phases, and I think that's really good. So you just get a lot of options with that. So you have a cone and you have a immersion brewer kind of in one. And then the other one I would say is a flat bottom brewer. And the one I would recommend is just the Oria. You can get a V3, V4, the glass one, doesn't matter as long as you're using flat bottom filters. Then you can use the Kalita filters. You can negotiate filters and have less bypass. Those give you, I think, the widest breadth of filter coffee brewing experience with two drippers instead of having a massive collection like I do in the cabinet behind me. All right, so this next one is from Red Tani, and it's a bit of a cheater kind of question. I will have to be tactful on how I answer it because the review is in kind of pre-production at the moment. But I will give you a bit of a preview, a little bit of a taste to whet your appetite, so to speak. And they ask, how's the decent since you've been maining it some time now? And I would say my feelings about the decent are complicated. But I think the best way to put this is I like what the decent does, but I don't really like how it does it. Now, of course, I'll get deeper into my thought processes on that in the full review. I'm not mad at it. I've enjoyed having it, but there's some aspects to it that just feel And I brought this up before. They feel a little cold, a little calculated, and just kind of charmless. But in the meantime, that's kind of a little taste, a little bite for you to nibble on and think about while I finish producing that review. All right, next question is from the Grand Mug. Shouts out to my friends in Chicago, and they ask, "What's your go-to order to suss out whether a cafe is legit? For me, it's batch brew. Gotta be on point." Now, I do think batch brew is a great way to determine their generalities. But again, I'm an espresso boy. So for me, cafes that serve it, a one-in-one is always the way to go. A one-in-one is, for those who don't know, I think Cat and Cloud was the originator of it, and it's a double shot of espresso split. One half is just a single shot of espresso. The other half is a single shot with some steamed milk, like a macchiato or cortado. If a place is busy, I don't want to be like, hey, make me this off-menu thing, a cortado or macchiato. Again, it's a good way to tell if they're pulling good espresso. A dialed-in espresso, I think, is harder than a dialed-in batch brew. So that can kind of give you a clue. And then also, they can steam milk. If they can pour latte art, get the right texture, all wrapped up in one single drink. Next question. And this one comes from Mr. Roselli. And they ask, do you ever miss the old days? I'd say pre-2017, when home espresso was super niche and less complex. Yes. Yes, I do. All right, next question. And I think this is the last one. It is. All right. So last but not least, we have a familiar face. And my friend Tom in the Pink Garage asks, what was the last thing you were pleasantly surprised by, coffee or otherwise? Now, I think I should do one coffee thing and one not coffee thing. And I think the last thing I was pleasantly surprised by in terms of coffee. Oh, I know. Okay, so one thing that I was just pleasantly surprised by, and I guess it isn't hugely shocking, but my friends over at Necessity come out with a new seasonal menu pretty frequently, every month or so. And they always have a cappuccino on there, and usually they're pretty good. They're, solid options. But I had never really had a red currant espresso or cappuccino, whatever, before. I haven't really had red currant. I couldn't really tell you or describe what red currant tasted like. But they have a seasonal red currant cappuccino that I got when I was last there. And that was delicious. It was almost like cranberry-esque. And when you think about cranberry, espresso, and milk, off the top, it doesn't sound great, but it was delicious. It was sweet and tart, and I don't know. It was just one of those drinks that you have every once in a while that was just I'm into this. And a non-coffee thing that I think I've been recently very pleasantly surprised with is my green thumb, I guess. I don't know how else to describe that. I've been spending a lot of time outside in the yard, as I mentioned earlier. I've learned how to trim hedges, which doesn't really seem that hard, but actually was a bit of a challenge. It was a full couple hours work. I planted a agave, I planted a lemon tree, and I've gotten a lot of joy from watching new limbs on the hedges come out and watching the lemon tree grow and it putting out some new fruit and watching them slowly turn yellow and sort of just tracking these things that have nothing to do with what I do for my job, right? It's just kind of been a pleasant surprise how much I enjoyed these things that just seemed for a while so domestic and honestly boring. But I guess I am almost 38 years old, so I should probably just do boring old people stuff now. Anyway, on that note, empty can in hand and a good number of questions answered, I think it's time to start wrapping this one up. And as always, pass the conversation on to you. So what are your thoughts on some of the questions and answers and thoughts and opinions I gave today? Do you fall into the same thought processes, or do you have other ideas, other bits of advice for some folks who are asking for it? Drop those and anything else you feel is relevant in the comment section down below. And as always, I'll see y'all in the next video. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that little bell button for notifications when new videos drop. Check out my Instagram @Sprometheus for more coffee content. Help support the channel by considering becoming a member for unique exclusive perks. And as always, stay caffeinated. Ponyboy